Well, welcome to Green Signals. Roger Bowker, Dad. It's fantastic to have you on the show, and thank you for doing this. You've had an extraordinary life that's always been connected around transport, but of course it began around railways. Born in Lancaster in 1941, your father, my grandfather, also had a railway connection as well. So just talk us through those early years and how you got introduced into railways and what the influence of Grandad was.
He had a great influence on me as a child. He worked extremely hard. He was a joiner by profession, a top quality cabinet maker. And we lived in Lancaster, and he worked at Waring and Gillows, which was a top quality manufacturer of furniture sold in the best places in Britain. And he was there. But then the war came. He was eventually asked to go and work in the railways, and which then was the London, Midland and Scottish Railway.
So that would have been a reserved occupation at the time,
It was. It was. Most people went fighting, but of course somebody had to stay at home, and they knew that the railways were going to be crucial to move the materials to the docks, to the troops and everything else. And there was no room for any mistakes. You needed somebody who was bright enough and skilled enough to do it. So that was his reserved occupation. He reported to an office based in Lancaster Castle Station. He had to work right up the West Coast main line through Carnforth, but not the Furness line, straight up the West Coast, over Shap to Carlisle, and then down to Appleby on what we now know as the Cecil and Carlisle Railway. So it's a bit like a dog's leg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what would his typical working day, working week, what would he have done?
Well, he was given a job sheet presumably by the office. So say there was a signal box, because they're all wood. And
everything was wood, wasn't it?
Everything was wood. Even the old LNWR signals, very high ones, with precarious ladders going up, because they had to pop over hills so the driver could see them. And so he was given a list of jobs that had to be done quickly. So he had a job sheet each day to go up to T-Bay or to Scout Green signal box. And because there was a problem with a wooden lat or something needed to be done, a window was broken, because often windows did break with the coal coming off the trains. And so he had to do that, and there may have been a level crossing gate needed to be attended to, because they had to be done properly.
How did he get to Scout Green? I mean, no cars in those days. How did he get there?
And no vans.
Right.
Nobody got a lift. So if his day started at 7:30 in the morning, he had to get up roughly 3 o'clock in the morning, cycle to Lancaster Castle Station, leave his bike there, get his job sheet. But the night before, he'd arranged with the foreman's office to stop a goods train round about, shall we say, 6:10 or something like that, the nearest one in the working timetable. And so they would stop the goods train at the station in Lancaster, probably on the Middle Express Road as well, so he had to cross a line to get. And he knew exactly where the brake van would be, and probably get into the brake van, the end of the goods train, where there'd be a roaring fire going on, and probably have a toast, and he might have had a little sleep to catch up with the sleep that he didn't have. And say, for instance, he was going to Scout Green signal box on the Shap incline, the driver would know. He would have been probably told when he signed on in the morning to pick up Bob Bowker, And that's what happened. And he did that all the time. The other thing he did was he realised there were 4 children at home, you know, with his wife and, you know, my mum. And it was very difficult to get meat, so he had a little gun. And if he saw a rabbit in the field while he was working up in these moors, he'd shoot it. And that was very nice, except he had to get it on the table in the kitchen and then get all the lead shot out. So I helped him do that as a young child. And I was an expert at lead shot.
Had a rabbits.
Yeah, and the
rabbits.
And, you know, we had rabbit every Sunday. That was our roast dinner.
Yeah.
And that's how we lived.
So when was your interest in railways triggered? Was it, because obviously you weren't going out with him, so how did you get...
Well, I was only young. I was born in 1941.
Yeah.
So I suppose my earliest memory was when I was coming up to 5, probably.
Yeah.
And I remember one day, my twin brother and I, we were playing in a field nearby where our house was in Lancaster. And suddenly, my dad shouted, "Come with me." So we stopped what we were doing, we put our cars in our pockets, and we followed him down a steep hill in Lancaster, down to the West Coast main line. And he wouldn't tell us what it was. Oh, why have we come here? And this was about 1948. Suddenly, there was this roar, not a steam train. It was 10,000 and 10,001
Wow.
coupled up together, roaring, pulling a rake of Stanier coaches, you know, with the portholes.
I don't remember them. I've seen the pictures. They're fabulous looking.
They were always beautifully maroon, and the locomotives were black and silver.
Wow.
And it was the first non-steam engine I'd ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And it was amazing.
And clearly the memory is fresh now as it was then, which is fantastic.
Completely fresh. I mean, I can't remember what I did yesterday.
Well,
but, do you know,
can remember
that's
that.
in my mind. I can see it now, just coming over the bank,
Fabulous.
ready to go down. And of course, I suppose the train had to stop at Lancaster Castle, so it would have been beginning to break, which was helpful because it wasn't going too
fast, no. Grandad worked on the railways till probably about 1950, 1951. So there must have been trips with priv tickets. I mean, some great memories of those?
Well, that was the great thing. There were some good experiences. I'll never forget one that was almost better than the story about 10,000 and 10,001, but both are equal for different reasons. His sister and her husband and children lived in Rosyth in Scotland.
Okay, right.
So one year we got a holiday. I think we only had a week. I think he didn't have many holidays. But we went on the train to Edinburgh, and then we changed and we got a steam train over the Forth Bridge to Inverkeithing, and we couldn't afford the bus fare to go to Rosyth, so we had to walk. It was about 4 miles. Anyway, we stayed there. He'd arranged a day out in Stirling and Perth by local train. We were just coming back to the station at Perth when we'd walked and seen and sightseeing and things like that. And we walked up the footbridge. It's a big, wide footbridge. It was then, and it is now.
Still now, yeah.
And I looked down, and I was so young, but I saw this Coronation Scot train, blue, with silver stripes.
And the coaches were blue as well.
And yes, I mean, I went past it to look down the coaches and then down the steps to go nearer to the train. And it was a full rake of coaches to match the stripes.
It was streamlined casing, was it?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
because all that streamlining was taken off
Yeah.
at the end, well, in the late 40s, I think. I'm not sure just when. But,
Right.
and from that moment on, I got really interested. And then, of
That
course,
was the moment.
That was my enlightenment of railways. I thought, this is good, isn't it?
But you had, I remember, because we Grandma and Grandad's parents, some lived in London, or sort of south of London.
Yeah.
So presumably in this time when there were priv tickets,
Yeah.
and because obviously Grandad worked for the railways, so you got these tickets.
Yeah.
Trips to London as well,
Yeah,
presumably.
we'd go for a few days. They lived in South London, in Streatham, and we went by train in those days when he worked for the railways. And it was most interesting because you'd think, well, you leave Lancaster at 7:32 and it's due into Euston at 15:25 or something. And you'd think that it's like it is today, but it wasn't. Because as you went down, and they were all steam, of course, it was all steam. Unfortunately, I wasn't old enough to understand all the types. I learned those later. My granddad met us at Euston to take us home because it was quite complicated. The first thing we did was we walked down to Westminster and got a tram in the late 40s. Still a lot of trams.
Because when the trams finished about 52, wasn't it?
52
Right, okay,
completely.
Yeah.
And this line came up from the south, there was Croydon and Tooting and so on, came up and went over one bridge and along the embankment. You remember there were tram tracks in the embankment, and we got it outside Parliament. So we had to walk from Euston down to there. And we just travelled 200 and odd miles on the train. But I never worried about things like that in those days. And it was like, and then on this tram, and if the old ones were really good, but there were some, I call them new ones. They were called Feltham cars. They were longer.
They're quite streamlined.
Very. And you went, I think you got on in the middle, I think.
Yeah.
And you went up the stairs. And at the front, there was this beautiful balcony, all in leather. And I sat there. Do you know what? I can live it now. And we travelled all the way to Streatham on these trams, and it was just fascinating.
But they moved to Purley, though, didn't they? So I mean, you could still do Purley on the tram.
Yes, my grandma and granddad later moved to Sonderstead near Purley.
Yeah.
And we then had to go all the way to Purley. Now,
how long's that?
It must have been over an hour. It was beyond Croydon. But it was just great.
So the next phase of your life was not in Lancaster. You moved to Barrow, which came at the same time as Grandad, your father, leaving the railways. How did that come about? And life must have been very different in Barrow in Furness.
It was, and my dad got a job. Funnily enough, in a something quite similar, but not the railways. He worked for the council, for Barrow in Furness County Borough Council, who had a lot of new build council estates, and there's a big town hall, a lovely town hall, which need a lot of maintenance. Sure. And of course they did everything in Barrow because they had their own water, their own.
Slightly cut off, isn't it, as a place where?
Yes, yes, it was. Yeah. But anyway, he went and he was the maintenance joiner. Right. For all of that. I'm very happy again, very happy to do it. And so eventually in a couple of years, I passed the 11 plus and went to the Barrow in Furness Grammar School, and so did my twin brother as well.
So what was the railway scene like in Barrow? Did you've carried on, you're hooked now because you've seen the coronation, you've seen, and so on, so you're completely hooked. What was the railway scene like then?
Well, there were no coronations, duchesses. They were too big to go they told me, round the Furness Railway.
Okay.
So, but I still had a tremendous interest in railways. I maintained that interest. And when I went to the school, the grammar school, I was able to bolt my school dinner down and go on my bike down to the central station. And there was a 1 o'clock train to London. It started at Workington. It had come in at 7:06 the night before. It had been washed and cleaned and everything at Barrow, and then it had gone up on an early morning to Workington, and then came back down from Workington down the coast, that lovely route. And it arrived about 10 to 1 and left at 1 o'clock. And so I wasn't the only one that did that. I wouldn't say half the school, but there was a lot of interest.
And what would have been pulling that?
It was always pretty well always a decent engine. And I'm going to Grice now. It was always a namer, had a name. That's what that meant.
Yeah.
And it was green, usually. It was always spotlessly clean, always. So usually a Jubilee or a Scot or a Patriot, usually.
Barrow in the 50s, I mean, they had the shipyards and the docks. It must have been extraordinary. I mean, presumably it was, if you loved freight trains, it must have been heaven.
Oh, it was. It was. There was a main road. I told you about Walney Island, where we walked.
Yeah, because you lived on Walney Island.
We did, yeah. And I had to bike. I think my mileage to school was 2.96 miles or something like that. They were really good at trying to save money, paying my bus fare, because I didn't get a bus fare, so I had to use a bike, which didn't do me any harm at all. So for the whole time I was there, I biked to school. And but there was always a force 8 gale blowing from the west, so coming home was a challenge.
Yeah.
It was the most windy place. But you had to be a bit careful because, you know, it was a lot of the bridge, particularly the bit that opened, was wooden and you could skid quite easily. So you had to be a bit careful. So that's what I did. And it was good to see these nice engines. Looking back, I think they were really shedded at Crewe.
Right.
And so they tended to repeat themselves. I remember a Jubilee called Defence often showed up, but it was okay, it was fine. I mean, I knew that I'd never see a real big engine there. It never happened. But of course, there was ways of doing that. And there was like get a workman's return, you know, on the 6:28 train to Lancaster and stay there at the end of the platform all day till 6:20 and come home on a Saturday. And then you saw everything going through Lancaster.
Of course, which was West Coast Main Line.
Yeah.
That must have been amazing.
Yeah, but that was okay. I mean, I couldn't afford to do that very often. We had no money. But so what I did was, we still had ration books. So as a family, we had no money. But we had lots of ration books because we were 4 children. So I set up a business of biscuits. So I bought, with my pocket money, I saved up and got a packet of biscuits. And there were some quite wealthy children, just had 1 child, you know. They had plenty of money, but no ration books. So it was business made in heaven at school. So I supplied all these children that couldn't get biscuits because they didn't have the ration books.
Yeah. Which paid for the workman's special to go to Lancaster and spot trades.
How that was funded.
Superb.
Yeah.
How fantastic. Freight round then, what would it have been? I mean, there's quite a lot of coal, wasn't it, came out of Workington? There was steel up there as well. Would that have all found its way through Barrow?
Yes, it did. There was a big steel works, and it was called hematite steel. It had previously been a very way ahead steelworks, this hematite steel, but they needed coke. And there weren't any coal mines in the furnace area. There had been a lot of iron ore,
Right.
and that had started the steelworks up, but that worked out before this period. So I'm not sure where the iron ore came from. I think it might have come by boat
Right.
into the docks, and they loaded it into wagons from there and took it up to the steelworks. But what appeared to be like every hour, there was a long coke train from the northeast, and it came over the famous Beela Viaduct.
Oh,
Remember that trestle viaduct?
yeah, between Kirby Stephen and
Which I
on
never
the
saw.
Stainmore line.
I never
Yeah,
saw,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Right.
But it came from the coke
Yeah.
trains, and then up to T-Bay,
Yeah.
and then down, and then turned right near Milnthorpe and came round that link to Arnside.
Yeah, that's long gone now, that, yeah.
It was a very useful
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
And these coal trains, and what was amazing was, it would then go through the docks area, and it was almost as though there was a main line from where it entered the docks up to the steelworks, because you could see these trains with coal trains going very fast, and they weren't far away from the steelworks, but they must have braked all right. But that was.
And what would have been pulling those? Is it sort of 8Fs maybe, or
No,
9Fs?
not as big as that. No.
Oh, really? Okay.
No,
right.
they had. It was mainly 4Fs. A lot of
Goodness.
4Fs. Now, whether or not they changed engines at TB, I have no
Right.
idea. I can't tell you that. But certainly, they had a lot of Fowler 4Fs.
Wow.
Very, very powerful engines, really. And they were good. And of course, the coke probably was not very heavy because
Right.
it's
Yeah.
had all its tar taken
Yeah,
out of
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So maybe that's
Maybe
the
that was
reason
it.
why. But they went fast. They did. And there was a low road, and then double lines all the way through the Shipyard area on the main road from Walney Island to Barrow in Furness. So on the odd occasions, if it was really wet, I went on the bus to school. You could see these austerity locomotives shunting wagons, steam. And then, of course, you had to be careful because you had to turn left to go in towards the town centre. But the Shipyard station was just down that road. And of course, that was specially for the workers who came.
But you told me a great story about Shipyard Station.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just extraordinary. I mean, this was a strange connection to Sunday school, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. So we had to walk from Sunday school to across the bridge, all the children, I say there's up to 200 children, and then through this Shipyard road, the main road, which went either side, the Shipyard was either side, where they build submarines now, of course,
Yeah.
still. And then down this road to the Shipyard station. It was a very simple station. I can't recall any buildings on it. It was just a couple
Like
of
a platform,
platforms.
right?
And that's where all the workers from the Furness Peninsula came to work. I think we mentioned this earlier. But like everything else, the great bit was the journey. The journey was just super. So you'd see a rake of non-corridor suburban stock. I don't know where it came from, because there was most of the service trains on the Furness line were corridor stock.
Yeah.
So they must have been stored somewhere, which we know there was because they turned out all this stock for 2 weeks holidays, you know.
Oh, for like Wakes weeks. and
Wakes
stuff.
weeks,
Yeah.
So anyway, it was great. It was just simmering away as we walked down. And I say, British Railways must have been really good because we knew exactly where to stand, and we got into this normally it took 6 adults on each side in this non-corridor stock, but of course it was
40 children.
well, certainly 12 on each side, children.
Brilliant.
And then each Sunday school was allocated a coach and would be dropped off where they were going. It was marvellously organised, but to travel through the docks, over this cradle bridge of the docks, you know, and out onto Salthouse. And if we were going on the Foxfield to Coniston line to the Sunday school outing, we turned left at Salthouse Junction, went through Barrow Station and went north around Askham and Kirby.
So you've already got people, right? So there will be people listening to this who, you know, have a love of history and heritage and railways. And you've just said on the Coniston branch, and they're already getting excited. You actually went down the Coniston branch.
They've a right to be excited. They've a right to be excited because normally, if we went on a school trip, say on Ascension Day, and we went hiking from school, we had to get the normal service train to the Whitehaven train, get off at Foxfield, and then get the shuttle to Coniston.
Yeah.
But you actually stayed on the same train. And it was a rare, what we would say now, you know, UK rail tours would say, oh, that would be a rare piece of track, really.
Did you ever get a chance to do the Lakeside branch as well? Because of course the Coniston ones, that's the one that's the really great one to have done, because there's none of that left now. But of course you can still go to Lakeside. But did you go the whole way on that as well?
The whole way. Again, on a Sunday school outing.
Wow.
We'd go down from Ulverston, down the Long Bank, you know, and to Greenodd, and we turn left at Greenodd and over this rickety iron bridge that seemed to be on a curve. And if you went by car alongside the railway, how that bridge, it was stuck in mud. I don't know how it took the weight of a train. It must have been safe, otherwise they wouldn't have done it.
No, sure.
Anyway, so that wound its way through to Haverthwaite, where everybody knows where that is, the Haverthwaite Railway, which is, if you haven't been on it, it's still good and a beautiful area. There was a steelworks near there called Back Barrow. And then, of course, by the river, just near Back Barrow, there was like a mill, but it was Dolly Blue. They made Reckitt's blue.
I remember that even as a kid myself. I remember the walls were all blue and the road was blue where the water had gone down it. It was incredible.
And you think, well, why blue?
Yeah.
Well, apparently, and I'm not a chemist, but I understand that the Reckitt's blue made your clothes white when you washed them in the dolly tub. So when you rubbed it and you put some Reckitt's blue in, it didn't come out blue. Your clothes didn't come out blue. They came out white, I believe. I mean, I didn't do it. My mum did it. But apparently she swore by it.
Yeah.
And everybody had it before washing machine.
Detergent. Yeah.
But there was also a very interesting thing. Just beside the Dolly Blue Works, there were waterfalls. And people used to go there and see salmon leap up.
Wow.
They were quite steep. It wasn't like Niagara or anything like that. But these fish had to really work hard. And I can't believe that it still doesn't happen, because it's still the same water coming from Lake Windermere.
Absolutely. There might be a ladder now, who knows? I don't know.
I just don't know. Yeah. It'd be good for somebody to know that, you know. Anyway, then of course they drop us off at the field, Haverthwaite or somewhere, and we'd do the same thing again. Again, on the return journey, I think my recollection is that the engine was facing the right way. Unless it was a tank, it might have been a tank, but it'd be interesting to know if there was a turntable at Lakeside.
We can ask.
There would have been a siding there, wouldn't there, to keep
almost. Well, we can ask Nigel Harris, who's my co-presenter on Green Signals. He worked on the Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway as a volunteer when it was a preserve railway for many years, and knows it like at the back of his hand. So we'll ask Nigel.
Yeah, that's really good.
Of course, you lived in Barrow at the time that, I mean, steam was still king.
Yeah.
And probably we all believed it was going to last forever.
Exactly.
But come the end of the 50s, things started to change. And I do remember a lovely story you told me about an early experience with diesel, which is just terrific.
Well, all the people at school, they were very excited one day, those that are interested in railways, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah. It's the 50s, so it's basically everybody, isn't it? So,
Well, it is.
yeah.
And the word got out that a DMU rail car was going to work on the Furness Railway from Barrow to Carnforth or Lancaster. And they gave the time. It was after school, if you were quick. And so I thought, well, I've never been in one. I wonder what they look like, you see. So a number of us went, and then I realised either somebody had told me or I'd read in the railway magazine that at one end there's a first class. I thought, hey, hang on a minute here. I want to go in the front to look out the front. But what if it's first class? So we went to a station just outside Barrow called Ruse. And there was a man in a cabin there. And I said, first class to Barrow, please, half, child. It was something like 5p or something.
Yeah. He'd probably never sold one of those before.
So he said, are you sure, first class? I said, yeah, because don't forget, I had a bit of money with my business.
Yes, yeah.
So I could afford it. And so I went in, and this train came with the whiskers and this beautiful DMU. There were I now know there were Derby Lightweights.
Fabulous.
It's the best design ever. This was about 1957. And the reason why is that there was a rail strike of some kind with the normal steam, and they'd sent this down. I don't know any more than that. But but everybody else, all the other lads, I kept it to myself that I was going in first class. And they got on the train and they were all excited, and I was. I went in first class and sat on the front seat. There was nobody there. These two luxurious seats, 2 and 2,
Yeah.
beautiful. And I didn't go behind the driver. I went the other side.
Yes, you could see out.
And it was wonderful. And we just pulled out of Ruse and then came up to the famous Salt House Junction to turn right to go to Barrow Central. It's only about a mile and a half.
Yeah.
But a wonderful experience. Suddenly, I could hear the door behind me slide open, and it was the guard checking tickets. So the first thing he said was, out.
Yeah.
So I said, why? What am I doing wrong? He said, out. You're not supposed to be in here. It's first class. I said, I've got a first class ticket. Well, it was somewhat subdued. He didn't apologise, but he did. In a way, he did.
Yeah.
So he said, oh, okay. So I said, can you clip it, please? So he did, which was fair enough. It was his way of saying sorry. So it was great. I mean, to actually see all the line that you've never seen before from a normal carriage.
We take it for granted now, because obviously we lived with diesel, multiple units, and these you can see out the front. This must have been an absolute revelation.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
It was. It was just wonderful.
More memories in the 1950s, of course, will be from runabout tickets on holidays.
Yeah.
Because something you introduced me to, where, sort of 20 years later, but back then it must have been fantastic. But fortunately, you had quite tolerant brothers and a sister, didn't you?
And parents, of course. I mean, it was marvellous, really. So we'd buy these tickets for a week, 7 days, and I think the price through the 50s was about 5 shillings for adults, and I think 2 and 6 or 3 shillings for children. So we had a week's holiday, the 6 of us, for that sort of money. And my mum used to make sandwiches for every day. when we got home at night, at 9 o'clock at night, she'd make all the sandwiches for tomorrow, put them in silver or greaseproof paper, and pack the bag, because we had to walk to the station. We couldn't afford to go on the bus. So I had to walk all the way to the station, across the bridge, through the railway tracks, seeing the coach trains go over the bridge to the steelworks, and then to the station. And normally we like to go on the 6:58 train to get the best out of the day. And other people from our church that we went to, there were lots of families in our church, and they hooked onto all of this. And so we'd decide the day before where we met for tomorrow, you see. And so we had almost a coach load of these people, but it was okay. It was, we saw places we wouldn't see otherwise. And we had a great holiday. And then we'd choose, we'd go one day, we'd go south to Morecambe. So we'd all meet at Morecambe and go on the roundabout aeroplanes and things like that, you know, and just sit on the beach and have our sandwiches. And then the next day it would be Blackpool. And we got to Blackpool, and there were still standard trams running, you know, and balloon cars.
Those little brush balloon cars.
Oh, and the single decker. It was just fantastic, you know. And so it was great. But one day, we had never been to Liverpool, but there was a member of our party who'd come from Liverpool. They said, oh, I want to go to Liverpool, it's really good, you know, New Brighton, oh, it's super, you see. So we decided our runabout ticket finished at Seaforth, between Southport and Liverpool. So we had to pay extra for that, but it wasn't much. But when we got to Seaforth, we noticed these very old carriages in the other platform. Wooden carriages, looked like something from the Ark. So I talked to my dad, and we got off to investigate, because there's frequency on the electric trains from Southport to Liverpool were good, you know. And we were going to meet up with these people in Liverpool anyway. Anyway, we found out that it was the Liverpool Overhead Railway. It was just fantastic. It was like something out of Victorian days. And so we found out, and the fares were quite low. So we got on and had a ride. And to our amazement, it turned off the electric line. It was electrified, but it turned off the normal electric line. Though incidentally were LMS carriages. Those lovely, rounded ones. Classic, you know, never been taken off.
Survived till the 80s, amazingly, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So it went really slow, this train. And then suddenly we went on this overhead, on this sort of causeway, a metal bridge thing. And to our right, going north, was lines of docks with full of boats. Empress of Britain, Empress of this and that.
Wow.
Passenger boats, freight boats. I suppose they were big for their day, but they wouldn't be big now, you know. And it was just amazing.
Did you go right into central Liverpool?
We did. And then we met up with our friends and said, you know what we've done? And we had a ride on it. And then later, the next year, we went the full length.
So you've done the whole length of it.
And also, the next time, I got some shed passes for us. It was £1 to have a shed pass. And there were lovely sheds, engine sheds, further north I discovered. And that was really good. Really good.
But the overhead railway, I mean, when did that go?
1956. It was, yeah. And they said the reason was that because of the salt air, because it was by the River Mersey.
I suppose, yeah.
And that's salt. And they said it was just, you know, they just didn't have the money to restore it.
It was corroded, right? Okay.
And equally, they knew that they probably didn't understand the full effect of containerisation, but somebody must have known that's the way.
Yeah.
1956.
So that was going south, sort of the delights of Liverpool, Morecambe and Blackpool. Words that mean something to a northerner, not necessarily everybody. They are fabulous experiences. But you could also go north. What would that involve?
You could go up on the West Cumberland line, right up to Whitehaven and Workington. I don't think you could go on to Carlisle.
Right. Oh, on the runabout ticket.
On the runabout ticket. I think you went to Workington or Whitehaven. And then you could do the whole of the Bassenthwaite Lake and Keswick to Penrith line as well, which were my old friend, the DMUs.
At Derby Lightweight.
Derby Lightweight.
I can hear people, by the way, listening to this going, I mean, normally this generates a Pavlovian response, like criminal, outrageous, should never have closed, get it open again. But it must have been the most amazing ride.
It was. It was.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
To ride alongside, from Cockermouth.
Yeah.
You left there and went alongside Bassenthwaite Lake.
Beautiful.
With big mountains behind.
Yeah.
And actually, if somebody said it should never have closed, I would say, I'm sorry to say, I know people like you looked far deeper into the costs and everything, but it shouldn't, because...
You've just made a lot of people very happy.
Because it was a great ride. And it would have sold even if you didn't want to travel at all, just to travel on it. It would be a ride, even if you ran from Cockermouth to... But it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Keswick Station was super,
Yeah.
And going through all the tunnels in Keswick and the bridges and everything.
Those bowstring bridges, weren't they? And yeah.
Beautiful. And you could sit at the front,
Of course. Yeah.
And then climbing up through Threll Kells.
Yeah.
And then on to Penrith. And then, of course, you connected with the West Coast main line.
Yeah.
Now, on the West Coast main line, we don't want to go back, do we? We want to keep going, make the day. So we'd gone to Penrith Station, and there was a train service, which I suppose runs now in another form, but my dad used to say it was called the Tommy Thompson. I don't know why, but these trains, and they went from Glasgow and Edinburgh, as far as I know, down to Carlisle, then they stopped at Penrith, and down Shap, and to Carnforth, and Carnforth main line was open in those days. It's not now. You have to go to Lancaster, but you didn't in those days. You got off under the clock, the famous clock.
Yeah, brief encounters, indeed.
But yeah, and that, I used to love that. You know why? Because they were clan classes, clans. And I do hope that the guys are successful in building this new clan. I think it's a really good thing. And because it means so much to me, but they could really go. And I don't know what speed we were doing down Shap, but it was exhilarating behind a clan and a rake of Mark Ones down there. And I did it as often as possible. And even if I had a runabout ticket on my own occasionally, I did that. To go on the DMUs and the ride from Keswick and also the clan ride, it was just fantastic. And at the bottom of Shap, just beyond T-Bay, was the famous Dillicar troughs. And I often think, and I know it can't ever be done, but wouldn't it be wonderful if one of the preserved railways could find a bit of level ground and rebuild the trough and show people, a bit like the post office one at Great Central.
Yeah.
I think that's a great experience,
Yeah.
seeing the bag picked up at the side.
Yeah.
But if they had a water trough as well. Now, I don't, what I don't know, and again, your experts, listeners and viewers, will know much better than me, there must be a minimum speed you have to go through to pick up the water. Yeah. I don't know that, but somebody will know.
Yeah. We will find out what the minimum speed is to actually make it work. I don't know. Wouldn't it be an amazing?
It would. I mean, standing at Quorn and Woodhouse Station, which is a great viewing place of the post office, and also go through troughs, wouldn't that be? It was a brilliant thing, wasn't it? Yeah. Brilliant.
Let's move into the 1960s now.
Right.
Because now you're getting close, you're starting to think about work, and probably already at this point. You've spent a long time in the bus industry.
Yeah.
Why, with such a love of railways, did you find yourself spending your career in public transport, but in buses?
Right. Good question. I loved railways as an interest, but I never got a real desire to go into operating railways at that stage. And yes, you're right, I'd left school in 58 and I was looking for me. I wanted to be a general manager of Barrow Corporation buses. Why? Because it seemed as though the evening mail that came out, which I delivered to make more money, to people's houses, was often very critical of the way that that it was run. Not so much operationally, but it didn't make any money. And I could never understand that, because the shipyard was booming. They were always launching oil tankers and aircraft carriers, launching these boats and then pulling them down docks and fitting them out, and submarines and so on. It was, in the 50s, was very busy.
Yeah.
I read somewhere they had cheap workman returns. Now, I knew nothing about economics. I didn't know about yield management, nothing till later. But something told me that it wasn't right when people had to go to work and fill the buses up. They had no other choice other than walk, and they had a day's work to do, and they worked hard in the shipyard, very hard. And why give them money off? And I just couldn't understand that. I can understand money off for when the buses aren't so full, but when they're full anyway, something told me it wasn't right. So I used to write to the general manager and ask all this, but he never...
Oh, he must have loved you.
He never answered, but it's okay. You know, I didn't expect him to. And it troubled me a lot, but I still wanted to be the general manager one day. Anyway, at that time, just after that time, my father, by which time he'd left the council thing, and he was a funeral director. And anyway, he was posted to Sheffield, and we all moved to Sheffield. And so we left Barrow. So I never got to be general manager of Barrow Transport. In a way, though, I had a link, because many, many years later, Stagecoach bought Barrow Corporation Transport, and indirectly, because I was a senior member of Stagecoach, and I mean, I wasn't responsible for Barrow at all. I'd never been back to Barrow since 1960. But In a way,
kind of felt.
there's a link
Yeah.
through the wonderful relationship with Stagecoach.
But you did become general manager of a number of bus companies. You did get your name on the side of the bus like they used to in the good old days.
I did. And but first of all, I needed to be trained.
Yeah.
I've always thought that all businesses should make money. To make tax revenue, I knew that much of economics, and I just couldn't bear the thought. Back to the selling the biscuits thing. Everybody should make fair profits, not silly profits, but fair profits. I had that thing inside me, and long before deregulation and everything else, I just felt that it was stupid to lose money on a business, and the buses were a business. But I needed to be trained. I needed to understand all the costs and everything. By this time, I was really excited about working for a bus company, and I was driven by what I wanted to see if it could make money, because I'd read all this in the Evening Mail.
Sure.
So very fortunately, I used to take a magazine about buses. Mr. Clapper, I think, was the guy that edited this, a very well-renowned operator, certainly knew all about buses. And there was an advert for a training program for scheduling and logistics at Eastern National Bus Company. So to cut a long story short, I applied for this job and got it. And that confirmed everything I'd thought about. There were 11 of us in this office facing forward, and there was a headmaster sat at a desk facing us. He was the most fantastic teacher and manager, but ruthlessly perfect in his teaching. And he taught us and me scheduling, using charts in those days. We didn't have computers, but actually, and I learned the skill of getting a timetable and having the least number of buses running that timetable, and juggling with the buses, turning them around quickly. It was all driving, cost, and then blocking out drivers' duties from the bus workings. Having got those, you couldn't take any more out, to drivers' duties, and doing a full day's work. And it was all about productivity, not being silly, but sticking to the law. But that is what I learned. And it's the best thing that I ever did. I'll always be thankful of that teacher. He was called Charlie English. Wonderful. I'm so grateful. The other thing I'm grateful, I couldn't afford to go by train back to Sheffield to home very much. It was too much of a cost, really. There were no special fares for young people in those days. And on Saturdays, there was a traffic manager there who was developing the commercial side of the business. It was a huge bus company, all of Essex, and he was developing express buses through the tunnel, the Dartford Tunnel, and extending all of his express buses that went to London and different parts of Essex, but then pushing them down to the south coast. And he was in the middle of developing that. And I did a lot of research on Saturdays for him. He asked me, and I said, I'd love to, And I did. I won't bore you with all the details, but I did a lot of market research in Southampton and places, where it needed to go. And I did. He taught me a lot about court cases, with the Traffic Commissioners Court, And the more I got to know all this, this is for me. I want to make this a career. This is just terrific. And then when I'd finished that in 1965, I got the job of schedules officer for Oldham Corporation Transport. And went on there. That was absorbed into SELNEC and Greater Manchester, and I was there 16 years, and so on.
Yeah.
So that was the groundwork. But I always reckoned it was the teaching at Eastern National, real teaching. And we ought to remember that, you know.
Well, it helped me out enormously on one occasion, and if you remember this, when I think it was 99, and I was leading Virgin's bid for the East Coast franchise up against GNER, and our bid included a high-speed line section, but also doing lots more direct services to London for places like Grimsby and Cleethorpes and other, which actually involved a very high utilisation of the Class 91 and Mark IV sets. And we couldn't ask GNER, because they were bidding against us, to understand how they did all their scheduling. So do you remember one day I said, I'm really struggling here. I'm not sure we've got enough Mark IV sets to do this. And you got out your graph paper and did the diagrams.
Using the public timetable. Which should never have been stopped.
No.
The Great British, and I've still got that one.
Yeah.
And I've tracked every train working as best I could. I don't think we were far out.
We were not far out. I think we might have been half a set on one return working out. It was unbelievable. And that's what went in our bid for the East Coast mainline franchise. So the Eastern National did us a great service. Yeah. And then you ended up then eventually at London Buses as the managing director of East London Buses. When it was all being privatised. Led an MBO. That wasn't successful because the person that was successful, of course, was Stagecoach, and that started a whole new period of life where, I mean, some of the things you've done at Stagecoach are just quite extraordinary.
Well, yes, and but it's very easy to work very hard if your boss is Sir Brian Souter, because just as my teacher at Eastern National was inspiring in his teaching, so Sir Brian was inspiring to me. It was just, it was just incredible, really. So I ended up by being the chairman of East London and also Selkent that he bought. And then in 97, he asked me to go and run a big company he'd bought in Sweden, which I did. But I won't go into details, but we sold that after about 2.5, 3 years. And then I ended up in America and so on. And even when I retired when I became 65, I joined his new company, Souter Investments, which was not Stagecoach, it was separate.
It was private family office.
And started a new network of services in Poland and then Finland and so on. So really, it was a wonderful experience working for Sir Brian Souter. I mean,
there's a joke in our family, of course, that when you had your retirement party, we all laughed and said, "Is this the second one, the third one, the fifth one?" Oh, Brian's asked me to go and do something else. I mean, he must be the most retired on multiple occasions person I've ever met. But you have now finally retired.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. As I came up to 80 about 3 years ago, I thought, well, I might get sick. I've been very fortunate health-wise, but it'd be a terrible thing to have done all this work and really enjoyed the bus industry and then become an old man quickly and lose my marbles or something. So I asked to be relieved. Not that I wanted to, but they quite rightly, it was nice. So I actually completed 62 years without being out of work non-stop.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm fortunate. I see it as being fortunate that I had the health, I had the encouragement from those that I worked with and everything, and wonderful people to work with, and made profits as well, which is what I wanted to do all those years earlier. I knew it could be done. I knew it could be done.
But even despite all the commercial and the entrepreneurial stuff that you've done in the bus industry, there's still bits of heritage legacy which are lying around. Which I mean, you were the driving force really behind the Heaton Park tramway in Manchester. Certainly the driving force behind the Manchester Museum of Transport, the bus. Was at Boyle Street, wasn't it? Which I think you're still the honorary president of as well. That was quite a story. Am I right? You managed to get one of everything when that was set up.
Well, yes. I mean, I think it was the most right thing to do. I was a senior member of staff in Greater Manchester Transport towards the end, and I noted, there were 14 bus operators that finally came in to form Greater Manchester Transport in 1974 under the 1972 Local Government Act. That's when, And there were some excellent people that were struggling. They'd restored, I think, a Salford bus and a couple of Manchester buses, but there was nowhere to keep them. They kept them in on the sufferance in a bus garage. But they came to see me in the office in Manchester, and said, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have something?" And I said, "Well, what I would do is there's 14, I call them companies. There's some companies like Northwestern and Lancashire United and everything, but a lot of them were municipals. But shall we say 14 operators making the 2,000 buses. And they finally became Greater Manchester Transport. But there was no, apart from this one Salford bus and two Manchester buses, there was nothing for grandparents to take their children to see and say, I used to go to school on that Oldham bus, and so on. So I had this sort of dream, which I shared with these enthusiasts, intelligent enthusiasts, and I'm still friends with most of them. I mean, they just, and I shared with them my dream, and I said, if only we could keep one of each of these 14 as a core preservation and have some sort of room or a small museum to put in so people could visit it and say, you know, I went on that SHMD bus, or I went to school on that Oldham bus, and so on, in the right colours, in that frozen in time. And they said, oh, absolutely, yes. So to cut a long story short, I asked the Director of Planning if I could write him a draft memorandum for him to take to the board of Greater Manchester Transport and set out this ideal thing. And again, without saying too much, he said yes, and he backed me, and I wrote that document and explained why it was important to have one at least of each. And also, for the future, any development of important buses that came along, and there were a number of electric buses and things like that, to save those and add to in future years, or the first of a big batch of new type buses. So that was covered as well. Mm. And they agreed it. And they also gave the new society, the Greater Manchester Transport Society, a redundant piece of garage at the back of Queen's Road Garage in Cheetham Hill, which was just so generous. And I'm eternally grateful for the board of Greater Manchester Transport and the Director of Planning in particular, who backed that proposal. And today, if you went to that museum, I mean, I left shortly afterwards to go to another bus company, but I was very involved for the time in setting all this up. But now it's like 500 times better than it was when I left. If anybody's listening, please go to the Greater Manchester Transport Museum. Look on the website. They have a lot of really interesting open days, and they run a free bus service from the centre of Manchester to the museum front door, and you can get all the information. It's quite cheap to go in as well. You will be gobsmacked what they have achieved. There's a real restored horse bus. There's a very old 1920s Ashton Corporation bus that has just been added to the collection. There's everything there, but then the core 14 buses are still there.
Brilliant. One of the great things about transport really is it's once you've got the bug, once you've got the interest, people love to share it, right? And I can remember that as a child. You know, some of the things that you took me on in the same way that your father, my grandfather, took you on. I can remember us going on the last trolleybus in Bradford. I can remember us going on a camping holiday to Germany, and by some absolute miracle, who knows how it happened, we ended up at Bingen Shed in the Rhine. Do you remember, right at the end of German steam? Yeah. And I remember stood on the turntable at Bingen with this enormous, great Kriegslot loco behind me or whatever. It's just fantastic. And those memories stay with you forever, right? Absolutely get that. You've carried on staying interested. So even though you've retired, you still do stuff. I mean, we've done some great stuff in the last few years.
We certainly have.
What do you think it is that causes us to still retain this interest?
There's so much interest there. That Midland Pullman we went on.
It was fantastic.
I mean, it was, all right, it's an HST, but it was the Midland Pullman.
Yeah.
When we stepped inside, it looked like a Midland
absolutely.
Pullman. It was a Midland Pullman.
Do you remember the crockery had the route of the line all the way through through Bakewell, of course, where I lived at the time.
Exactly. And that company that restored that had gone to a lot of research and a lot of trouble to get it as right as they can. All right, it wasn't the Midland Pullman because they were all scrapped. Yeah. But it was very good. Yeah. And we had the most wonderful day together. Really a wonderful day together. I make a wish list of things still to do. I'd like to see the tramway and going on to the ferry at Hythe near Southampton.
Right.
Because I think that must be still wonderful, and they're trying.
Well, it very nearly closed, so it really did. But I think it got a reprieve. Yeah. So there's our next trip sorted out.
I can't understand why people at large aren't also interested. No. I don't think I'm a boring old man. I don't think so, because I'm still, as you say, I've still got that passion, and. It's very difficult to say why it is. It just is. And there's so much still to see. One passion I have, because I believe in it, are trolleybuses. And so we'll be going in April for 3 days to the Geneva area, where they've really perfected trolleys there. And there's lots of other trolleys along Lake Geneva towards Montreux.
If you look back at the last 50 years, 60 years in public transport in this country, was that our biggest mistake?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
zero emissions. Yeah.
They shouldn't call them trolleybuses. They should call them electric buses.
Yeah.
Or e-buses or something. Yeah. They shouldn't be called trolleybuses. It's meaningless to people. I get excited about trolleybuses because it's addressing one of the most important issues that that the world is facing at the moment. And if every bus was a trolleybus, it would be wonderful, really. And they can't all be wrong.
No.
They can't all be wrong. Yeah, I don't want to be remembered for being a boring old person that thought everything was good in the 40s and 50s and 60s, because it wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't. There were a lot of mistakes made. Yeah. And there's been some wonderful developments in railways, buses, battery buses now, and things going on. Even the fares, the £2, you know, filled up buses. There's some very interesting things going on right now that people ought to know about and enjoy, and put their car in the garage for a rest and get out there and travel on the train, the buses, and just the Elizabeth line.
Yeah,
the Elizabeth line. And HS2 will be good. And it's limitless what there is. And so I'm still excited. I'm still as excited as when I walked into that schedules office at Eastern National and came out as a qualified logistics planner and scheduler. And I still feel the same passion.
Well, I guarantee you will never be ever thought of as boring. That has been just a brilliant conversation. I knew some of the stories, I've learnt new ones. That's been absolutely superb. Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking me. Thank you so much.